Hello, good morning and good afternoon. Welcome and thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Insights-Driven Businesses, the Next Frontier in the Data Journey. Our guest speaker, Forrester Principal Analyst, Michelle Getz, and Srini Srinivasan, co-founder and CDO of Aerospike. Michelle is a Principal Analyst at Forrester and serves enterprise architects, chief data officers, and business analysts who navigate the complexities of data while running an insight-driven business. Her research covers artificial intelligence, technologies and consultancies, semantic technologies, data management strategy, data governance, and data integration. Srini is the founder and chief development officer of Aerospike. He has 2 decades of experience developing and operating high-scale infrastructures and holds over 12 patents in database, web, mobile, and distributed systems. Srini co-founded Aerospike to solve the scaling problems he experienced with Oracle databases while he was a senior director of engineering at Yahoo. We will be recording today's session and will email the link to you in the next day or two. Feel free to enter the questions into the GoToWebinar question box and we'll address those at the end of the session. Here is the agenda for today's presentation. First, Michelle will start the discussion with Forrester research on systems of insights. Then Srini from Aerospike will discuss the data architectures specifically required for insight-driven businesses. And then we'll wrap up this webinar with a discussion and Q&A. Michelle?
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me today. So what I want to talk about is an insights-driven business and why it's really important for you to start orienting yourself and your data strategies around not just the data itself, but really what do you get out of the data? What knowledge do you attain? What types of insights can help you make decisions? And how to really not only attain the outcomes that you want for your business, but speed up and amplify what those outcomes are. So I'm going to introduce you to what a system of insight is, how you architect around a system of insight to drive real-time actionable businesses, and then also provide some examples and business cases to get you kind of thinking about where can you apply this capability and strategy within your organization. Well, why are we talking about this today? We always hear the term digital. Companies are running a digital business. There's, e-commerce. That's the way that we engage through our mobile capabilities. It's how we're using technology to really, drive the operations and activities that happen within our organization. And, digital is really something that isn't just about taking existing business processes and interactions and transactions and just doing them through technology, but it's really allowing us to sort of rethink and reinvent the way that we execute so that we make our businesses better and make our activities better. And companies are really waking up to this fact, and 61% of them are increasing their investments in their digital strategies and capabilities to push them forward. The thing that we sometimes forget in this digital conversation is that digital creates a lot of data. It's really taking in everything that's happening in our interactions, what's going on within our environment, how transactions are occurring, and communications are happening. But at the same time, it's collecting all of this information. It's also able to harness that information and running analytics and gaining insight so that you can take action and make better decisions and move your business forward. And many organizations today are really driving towards being insight-driven, not just digitally driven and not just data-driven. It's really the insight that is the value that's being provided. So this isn't just, talking about it and putting another piece of capability into the hype cycle. What Forrester is finding through its research is that insight-driven businesses, because they're able to get insight and put action to that insight quickly, are able to grow their organizations 8 to 10 times faster than the global economy. That's a real wealth and revenue being created in these organizations that's being put back into capital that they can use to extend their businesses, or finding new areas that they can explore and expand their business models, as well as, how can they put that to use through better operational efficiencies and ways to lower the total cost of ownership and thinking about profitability. So what are some examples of this? I really like this one around Unilever. We think about the consumer packaged goods industry and what happens within retail, and they've always been at the forefront of really leveraging information and data to drive their businesses forward. We all hear about them, gaining 0.5% a lift from a marketing campaign, and that, expands them out into millions of dollars, and that's so intriguing. But Unilever is really trying to take that to the next level. What types of information not only can they understand about their products and the affinity of those products and the repeat purchases that happen with customers, but what is that experience that the customer has? How are they influenced when they're in their shopping experience? And how is the relationship and partnership with the stores that they collaborate with to, sell their products, influencing and shaping the experience of their customers? So they were really able to harness a significant volume of information, not just around customer profiles and transactional information, but really looking at how does weather and traffic and social and general store behavior affect your purchasing, and tying this back to understanding inventory levels, types of promotions that they might be running or their partner store may be running, and thinking also about the different pricing and price elasticity models that can come out of this. Gathering all this information, becoming intimately involved in understanding what's happening in that customer behavior at the store for a product on the shelf, they were able to rapidly introduce insights that gave them a better understanding about how do they optimize their store inventory levels for the demand of their products. So really sort of micro inventorying within these specific stores and on their shelves, and also coordinating better the way that they push their promotions and optimize their pricing for a lot of their loyal customers. And this was achieving a 2 to 4% uplift in revenue within 2 of the cities that they were testing this out in. One of those was in New York, and I believe the other one was in the New Jersey area. So it really kind of gave them an understanding about not only how can you see everything that's coming in around them, but really putting that into insight that can be operated on immediately and see real benefits. Now, the other example that you can take a look at is, how are you taking in real-time information as machine and stream data off of, field operations activity. The leading North American energy company, who is in the oil and gas industry and oil and gas production, spends a significant amount of money and investment putting a new wellhead in and putting a new drill in. And oftentimes this can be fraught with issues around getting the drill up on time. They run into geological issues around, machine issues, sort of operational function. And for every time you're not able to bring that drill online, you can really incur a significant amount of cost, which could be up to $1.2 million per day to bring that drill online. So what they're now doing is adding a lot of sensor data on top of those drills and the drill heads, and they're able to measure things around the geology, around the gases, around the pressure, and certainly around the moisture within those areas, and any sort of activity in terms of how you're pushing that drill in and using different techniques with sand and water to make it easier to create that well. Well, being able to retrieve all this information from the sensors, reconcile that with information that they had already gathered and understood about the area where they were going to put that drill head in, they were able to understand if they were going to run into issues, as they were progressing, and offset those risks quickly so that they didn't have any downtime in the bringing up of that well. and they did see those cost reductions of up to $1.2 million incurring. But what that's also helping them is it's not just to get the well in, but now they have a better understanding of what's happening in those wells and are starting to put into place better predictive maintenance capabilities, optimizing the field operations for those maintenance, their MRO activities that are occurring, handling the inventory to help support improvements and things that they need to do from a maintenance perspective. And also they're starting to look at how can they introduce some self-healing types of capabilities by expanding on the machine learning. So what you're noticing here is really sort of expanding upon the understanding of how you put information and insight to work, not just from a digital capacity, but also from an intelligence and a real-time perspective. And so what does this really mean? Think about how we've been investing in our data lakes in the past. As we stand up a Hadoop environment, we source all of this information from our systems, sometimes internally, sometimes externally, and then we go out and we start to look for what is it that we can put this data to use for. Well, the reality is that when you don't understand why you're building your data lake, it's very hard to get adoption from the business because they don't know what to do with the data lake, and they don't necessarily understand or agree with the types of information that was put in there, or it just wasn't cataloged appropriately, and so you walk into a swamp versus something that is pristine and usable for a lot of the insights. So many organizations are actually thinking about pulling their data lakes offline and starting over again and really rethinking their strategies to orient those data lake investments and those data platform investments towards some of the opportunities that we both saw with that oil and gas company and Unilever, so that it's being driven towards business outcomes. And ultimately, what's the top of mind here is being able to work with insights as you understand them, as they're happening in your business, not letting them sit there and perish because you didn't act on them quickly enough, and ultimately, ensuring that your business continues to move forward. So the first thing I want you to really think about is, what are the speed lanes of insight? How do you take data and insight and line it to different types of decisions, different types of tasks, and different types of interactions that occur within your organization? Each one of them needs insight at different times. You have different cadences within your organization. Strategically, you can look and review information. You can do exploration and discovery. It shouldn't take months anymore, but oftentimes weekly you're going to have a variety of questions that come up so that you understand why things are happening in your business and what can you do to optimize. Our traditional business intelligence and agile BI efforts are still necessary and need to be supported because you always have to have that overlay of what's happening within your business, and are you meeting the metrics and KPIs that you're expecting, or maybe doing a little bit of digging and understanding which sectors are doing better than others or why you see those sectors doing better than others. So that doesn't go away, but our database systems, our data management systems, will be better optimized to answer those questions quickly and not have our managers and our executives waiting for those answers, sometimes up to weeks before they can take action. Where it starts to become really interesting is speeding up insights and moving those into these operational and real-time scenarios where now you're harnessing them in seconds and sub-seconds. And why are you doing that? Because you want to make decisions when it's the most opportune moment, when it's the most relevant, and you also want to be surfacing up those insights to influence the types of decisions and activities that both your customers and your partners want to execute on, whether that's shopping, whether that's improving fulfillment and logistics, whether that's, coordinating manufacturing efforts and supply chain efforts. Real-time insights is really where it is, and it's how you're starting to grow your business significantly, as we talked about before. So you're going to think about a system of insight, and ultimately a system of insight is a closed loop on being able to capture what's happening around you, understand it, gain insight from it, put insight to work, learn from, how, what happened by taking actions on that insight and putting that back into your data management and system of insight environment so you're continuously improving and optimizing your business. This is really predicated on two things. You need to be thinking about experimentation and a test and learn mindset. You're always going to have a hypothesis. You're always going to have, past experiences. And you want to introduce those into your digital system of insight so that there's some context around what you're trying to achieve and an understanding that maybe what you knew is true, so let's test this out and see how we can, further that understanding, or maybe what we thought is a little bit more of a negative bias, and we should be using our information in those real-time interactions and optimizing so that we're moving forward with what are better outcomes versus relying on something that might have been old thinking. Now, by closing the loop in this system of insight, what we haven't talked about yet is that analytics are embedded in these processes in the way that you process the data either through a batch capability or for a real-time or stream capability. And because you're closing the loop, you're starting to be able to introduce test and learn within the analytics itself and leveraging new capabilities like machine learning and artificial intelligence. So not only are you as the business learning from what's happening as you engage with your customers and as you run your operations, but the system itself is learning so it can be not only predictive and suggestive, but it can also be prescriptive, so that you can be much more effective in the way that you operate. There are really 5 common elements to a system of insight as you're thinking about the architecture. So let me walk quickly through what this reference architecture is. The first component is really thinking about instrumenting applications so that you can get to insight and measure the right outcomes. You don't just design an e-commerce environment where somebody can come in and start, shopping for things. You're not just offering up a catalog to them. You want to be able to track the events. You want to be able to track the behavior or the movements on the site. You want to be able to track the purchases, how much was in the cart, the time on the site, all of those things, who came to the website, for example. And so all of the mechanisms you should be thinking about, what do I need to know? What insights do I need to have? What questions am I going to ask? And how am I going to know that my system of insight is working for me? So number 1, think about instrumenting around the insight and the outcomes so that you can always test, learn, and move forward. You're going to start to optimize your thinking around your pipelines. How do you capture and evaluate data in real time? Understanding that the cadence of transactions, of behavior, of decisions, and where those best points are to influence. Or if you're in an automated scenario like an IoT capability, understanding how quickly information is flowing off of those machines and when and what is most relevant to be able to act upon within those systems, and being able to embed those analytics into the streams themselves or some of the real-time processing. Number 3, you're going to need a heavier compute engine underneath this. And this is where you're starting to see the architectures emerge that are more hybrid in nature, where they're leveraging the performance compute power that's happening all the way down into your infrastructure and your chips and your database management platforms, all the way up into sort of the real-time compute that you're going to see within an in-memory capability. These hybrid environments are providing not only the performance levels that you need for a real-time system of insight, but they're also performing better around the reliability because they're able to handle the scale of transactions and streaming information that is coming off better than some of our traditional platforms have done in the past. The 4th thing is insight to execution framework. So understanding that as you see information, as you understand what's going on around you, as those insights are starting to emerge, instrumenting the mechanisms, those processes and activities in the applications themselves so that you're able to automate what the tasks and activities are going to be. You don't want to separate insight from the actions, because that delay creates that perishability of those insights, and you've missed your business opportunity to influence and gain the results that you're looking for. And lastly, you want to think about this in a mindset of a big data fabric so that you can let your system grow and flex. Well, what does that mean? We understand that while you may initially stand up an e-commerce environment or a POS system, or you may stand up a mobile application environment for field operations or maintenance, those two scenarios are very pointed towards specific tasks and roles. But in our businesses, we know that roles, responsibilities, business units start to collaborate together. We know our ecosystems are also expanding to incorporate more and more partners within those ecosystems. We're in a multi-channel environment. And then also we are in a multi-channel environment in terms of the way that we interact and deliver. We're going to be combining our on-prem capabilities with our partners' capabilities, with SaaS capabilities, with mobile and IoT capabilities. And sources of information and the way that we gain insight, it's going to be floating everywhere. So you really want to think about the data services capability that's able to stitch together all of these different sources of information, all of these different purviews and perspectives and business processes, and bring that into the full system of insight where you're able to start understanding and executing for the different tasks that are related to the applications where interaction is occurring. So what do I want you to think about tomorrow? How can you move forward on a system of insight and get value out of this? And I'm sort of tongue-in-cheek here. It's not just for tomorrow. There are some things that you can do today. Start to really understand what your business needs, thinking about how systems of insight and the architectures around that are solving around specific business challenges, around the new ways you want to operate, and orienting those around things that have true business outcomes so you can demonstrate first the success around where you're making your investment, and then the other piece is that it's giving you a foundation to move forward into other areas. So always orient your investments and your strategies around the needles that move your business. Secondly, architect for the right speed lane. Oftentimes from a data management perspective, and when we're building data lakes, we're thinking about supporting stronger analytics within a data science workbench, providing agile BI capabilities so people have self-service analytics at their fingertips. But those are delayed insights to action. Start thinking about those speed lanes that move up into operational and transactional environments, as well as some of the streaming environments that may be starting to emerge within your business. Don't let your insights die on the vine. And then lastly, don't just act upon those insights and not follow up on it. Really close that loop, bringing data and analytics together in that test and learn mindset so that you're continuously reviewing, evaluating, find those new levers of opportunity so that you can optimize and improve around efficiency and effectiveness in your business. So thanks for giving me the time to give you an understanding about systems of insight. What I'm going to do right now is pass you over to Srini, and he's going to talk to you from an Aerospike perspective about what they're doing to help their customers deliver on a system of insight.
Okay. Thanks, Michelle. That was a fascinating presentation on the impact of the systems of insight. Now, if you decide in your business to build such a system, I'm going to spend some time on the data architectures that might help you do a really good job of doing that. If you look at, for example, a system of insight, one of the most important things that you might need to decide is the size of data you want to use for it, or the amount of time available to make a decision. So there's a spectrum of these systems, and I will go into that a bit. Also, there are a lot of decisions to be made in terms of the kind of database that would best kind of express the kinds of express the abilities for the insights that you're interested in, as well as how hard is it to build it and what kind of reference architecture is necessary for that. Following that, I will present some key trends that we are seeing in the marketplace in real deployments, and also go into a couple of use cases of really deployed solutions. So if you look at the system of insight, there is a spectrum, as I mentioned, and I've shown two dimensions here, size and time. If you go to the left, you have databases which are large in size and typically batch-based insights. So the amount of time that you have is more, so you can make, I would say, exhaustive analysis of vast amounts of data, typically using systems like Hadoop and so on, where you can then even generate models which you can apply in real time. As you progress towards the right of this chart, to the rightmost, what you have is real-time sub-second decision-making, as Michelle mentioned, and these are really powerful systems. Now, the real trick here is how do you feed enough data into these systems and enough models, if you will, which are typically generated using AI and machine learning algorithms on potentially vast amounts of data using a batch model training mechanism. And then you feed those models into the systems which are depicted on the right. And at runtime, you're able to then use the runtime action as well as some history information and the model to essentially make a decision. The decision could be of the sort, Michelle talked about in terms of the drilling, mechanisms. It could be for real-time advertising. It could be for something like what rate do you provide a particular user for a car rental based on the time of day or the location and their particular usage and so on. So all of those decisions have a direct impact on what the user or the consumer might do, or it might also have a real impact on things like fraud detection and so on. In addition to the real-time and the batch, there's also an intermediate area which typically involves things like caching recent queries and so on. So you can not only look at the exact data of the event that is happening, but you could also look at the results that were generated recently by doing similar kinds of queries against the database. So the most important thing to understand is there are two dynamics here. One is the amount of time that you have and the amount of data you have to process, but there is also an ongoing dynamic as the time, over the years, the amount of data in each of these particular areas is also increasing. For example, if you can look at more data in real time, you're able to make better decisions. And this could be a competitive advantage. So the way you pick your data architecture in terms of how it scales up, as well as how it performs over time with more and more data and in less and less time, is going to be critical to your business. Relating this to the picture that Michelle showed earlier, what we really need to do in terms of databases is that the database obviously has to be able to access large sets of data. It also needs to be able to deal with the most recent data sets, where a location of a user is, where a particular IoT kind of metric is coming from devices. It should be able to deal with the fast or the most recent information, but it also has to deal with historical information so it can match patterns. Additionally, it is really important to keep the TCO low enough that the benefits that you get from running the systems of insight queries can provide, is at a low enough cost that it provides enough of a incentive, I would say, to use it more and more to improve your business. So the other thing is the cost per access is critical to control. The interoperation, as Michelle mentioned, in terms of these various data pipelines is also critical. And we already talked about briefly about the AI and machine learning powered decision engine, which is really, really important because the kinds of rules that are needed vary on a per business basis, even though the underlying technologies might be very similar. So it is important to train these on your specific amounts of data and also visualize and close the loop so that individuals who are experienced in these areas are able to evaluate the decisions being made in an objective manner. So going further, so essentially what I've shown here is just illustrated what I just said in the previous slide a little bit more visually. There are a variety of sources of data on the left, and there are both large and fast systems. For example, Hadoop-based systems could be really large and exhaustive, while something that uses Spark or Storm could be, using streaming data and move much faster. All of these will have to be processed through a machine learning or AI libraries, and also other traditional methods of matching and so on, to be able to provide significant insights. Now, these insights, there are various ways in which you can process these insights. People could be coming to your website and you can make a decision on the fly, for example, or you could be essentially notifying users regarding things like offers to induce them to come visit your site, or you could be monitoring all running transactions on a payment site, essentially to identify fraud before it even happens, which is actually an important and a valuable contribution a system of insights can do, because it directly relates both your top line and bottom line. Finally, you do want to have the ability for a team of people who are experienced in these areas to be able to close the loop and maybe introduce some more data which is more relevant if the decisions are not accurate enough, or to train it with a larger amount of data to make sure that the decisions converge to something which is best of breed. So if you go into a reference architecture for this, what we can have, what needs to happen is your system of insight decision-making process needs to have a database at the core of it, which provides both high-velocity and low-velocity data. Typically, high-velocity data is only relevant for a short amount of time, while the aggregations and so on are valuable for longer amounts of time. So you would need to weight this information properly. And what this also implies is such a database needs to be able to take a very heavy read and write load. Databases also needs to be, interoperate with streaming engines. Essentially, these could be fed data from the edge of the enterprise, and this data is then, run through essentially, machine learning algorithms and also traditional analytics engines. And then you can generate a whole bunch of events and push notifications if you wish, or you could even have intelligent bots which could go off and collect more data and essentially, as I said, in some cases, get actors who are outside this system to react based on information which is now available. Data warehouse is also important in the sense that the systems of insight database has to have the benefit of all the data that you have collected in the enterprise, which is relevant to the decision making. And this is obviously not an instantaneous process. Over time, there will be more new kind of interfaces needed in order to get these new kinds of data into the systems of insight database. What is not shown here is also the exhaustive analysis and batch training that can happen in data, which can then be fed into the systems of insight database, which can then be used in real time to make better decisions. So if you look at the key trends that are driving the data architectures for such databases, what you have is, the most important thing, of course, is how do you increase revenue? And what we have found out, and this is actually a pretty well understood fact in the internet area, is revenues are directly proportional to customer experiences. The better the customer experience that you have, the better the revenue of the company. The top line gets much better. Now, in order to have a better customer experience, we would have to use all of the techniques that we've spoken about, including processing of the data. But one of the most important things that is required is low latency. A very, I would say, a vital customer experience involves fast responses to user input and user actions. And that's a very critical aspect of these systems. The other most important thing is, about being up all the time. When a service is up all the time, there is a better chance that you can provide the customer experience superior to anybody else around. In fact, this is one of the things which made Facebook, I think, survive, was they were the only social network which is up all the time. And that is actually really, really critical for users who depend on these solutions. Now, ease of deployment, distributed auto scaling on both bare metal and cloud environments with very high throughput and availability is critical for a 24/7 operations of a highly available system. The TCO of building these systems and running these systems is also critical. What that means is you don't want to spend so much money in generating an insight that is much more than the benefits you're getting on your business. And that, interestingly or thankfully enough, is essentially, I would say, predicated on using the latest in storage technology. There are techniques of in-memory and hybrid memory, which needs to be leveraged by these systems. We could even have what are called cache-less systems. Your database becomes as fast as a cache if you use a hybrid memory architecture. Not only does it reduce TCO, it can provide the higher throughput, the lower latency, and higher uptime at a lower cost. And this is something which is, therefore, it's really important to keep abreast of these new storage technologies. The fourth thing that I listed here is that there are traditional systems which have run with very high throughput and latency in the past, but they have not been able to be distributed. And these are typically run on the mainframes, and they are really correct. Now, what we have now is a new set of technology where you will have both high performance as well as strong consistency. And this is what you should be looking for, so that your decisions are not only recent, but they are also extremely consistent and correct. And these are applications which can even use and run on a system of record. Finally, the most important thing, other than actually having the best data architecture, is the interoperability of this data architecture with other basic systems. So interoperability is actually king in these areas, because without the right data from wherever data resides, if you're not able to bring it to the system of insight, it is not going to make the best decision possible, and the whole enterprise might not be worthwhile. So it's really important to have interoperable systems. I'm going to go quickly into a couple of use cases. These are really deployed in production for several years that I know of. And what we have here is a case where you have a traditional mainframe system which would be used to store the user's accounts. But what would need to happen in the system is the risk calculation would happen overnight. The mainframe was not able to handle the load. Now, moving to a modern system using a hybrid memory architecture, what you can get is the ability to run these risk-based calculations every few minutes on your entire database. And this essentially transforms the business, in this case, a retail bank for the positions database, in such a way that their customer experience is better than pretty much everybody else's in the industry. And such essentially transformative user experiences are possible using a great systems of insight database built on a robust data architecture. The second use case I'd like to discuss is a real-time identity check. This is by a company called ThreatMetrics. ThreatMetrics essentially provides the ability to predict risk on individuals who are coming and accessing an enterprise's website over the internet. This is extremely critical, because if the real customer is on the website, then the enterprise can provide the best possible customer experience to that customer. However, if they misidentify customers, either let in a person who is impersonating a real customer, which could be a real problem, not just in customer experience, but also in terms of the ability of the business to actually run a solid and secure business. And on the other place, if they would block too many people all the time without any idea of risk, then it creates a poor customer experience. Either way, they essentially either lose their profitability or they lose their customers. So creating such a robust identity check across all internet users, which enterprises can use, is really important. Now, in this particular case, these customers ran into a whole bunch of problems running into an in-memory architecture where they had to use hundreds of machines, and eventually they ended up using a hybrid memory architecture which had only used a couple of dozen machines with much better latency as well as much better customer experience. Scale, as I point out, is really important, and even in an enterprise which is used to running things on the mainframe, the scale is starting to become like pretty much what is seen in internet companies like Google and Facebook. And these kinds of transactional growth as well as data growth requires us to run enough of these systems of insights like workloads on pretty much most of the enterprise use cases these days. I will conclude then this point. In terms of what we have seen here, the data architecture is really critical. So please pick those carefully, taking in advantage of the trends that I have outlined. Thank you.
Thank you, Srini, and thank you, Michelle. Thanks for the very insightful presentations, and the discussions we're going to have now will be relevant to the points Michelle and Srini were making. So if you have any questions, please go to the GoToMeeting webpage and try to put it in the panel. So Michelle, to start off a discussion, so you when you talked about system of insights, one of the questions I have was, do you see customers, you gave some really good concrete examples, the Unilever one and the oil company production one. So do you see some of the customers in these cases, do you see them having a few instances of these system of insights based on the outcomes they're driving? Because obviously Unilever has multiple problems, right? Or dynamic pricing and inventory management are completely different topics. But I mean, so how do you see customers adapting to SOIs today? How do they plan on delivering these things?
Yeah, so oftentimes, and you're seeing it begin within the marketing and sales environment, and mostly that's because a lot of the SaaS applications, the digital types of experiences have been designed in there, and you're already harnessing all the connectivity and synthesizing and harmonizing all of the data together. So it becomes a little bit of an easy starting point. And quickly, those types of companies get frustrated that they're not getting enough insight. They're doing a lot more analytics on the side outside of their marketecture, for example, and they're realizing that they want to use those insights to influence, commerce behavior on their websites. They want to influence recommendations if somebody's in a brick and mortar store, or they want to impart insights into their CRM system that really assist in either salespeople speaking to customers or customer support representatives and agents working with customers either through problems or other types of questions that they may have. So oftentimes you see it getting started there where the first point is being able to take the investments that have been done from a data science and analytics perspective and start to connect that upstream into those systems of engagement and systems of automation. And like I said, the areas around marketing and sales are often like a first place to start. But organizations that tend to be a bit more manufacturing-oriented, industrial-oriented, they're very process-driven already, have already made investments around robotic process automation. And so now what they're looking at is, as their manufacturing plant floors, as their machinery is becoming much more intelligent because of the sensors that are being applied, sort of combining the information that comes off machinery and the MRO example that I gave you, or just the operational processes that go on with that, as well as analytics that they've been running to just understand broadly where they can get better efficiencies in their activities. Again, they use that as a point to start bringing those things together. So you're looking for those centers of gravity where you've already made some investments in sort of digitizing your processes, whether those outward facing with customers or whether those are internally facing for running your operations. in your manufacturing, and where you've already started some of the insight development with your data scientists or more advanced analytics teams, and really it's stitching that together to making it real time. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an example, but you're looking at sort of what is the culture and opportunities within your business and orienting towards where you've already made investments, both in the digital side for operations and engagement, and then at backstream as well for the types of analytics you're starting to expand and develop.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, basically, to your point you made earlier in your presentation, I mean, it's fundamentally taking some of the investments and executions you already have, which are today data and digital driven, to make it much more insight driven in a way. You already done. Some of these customers already tried to address these, maybe not gone all the way there and close the loop. So those probably would be the low hanging fruit in some ways. So
exactly.
So thanks, Michelle. So the next question, Srini, you focused on data architectures, especially required for the system of insight. So and you kind of highlighted a few key trends in the end. But I think fundamentally fast database, like you were talking about in terms of having the right performance characteristics, as well as also having strong consistency characteristics is important. But how do you, what else do you think, or how do you see some of the other data platforms evolve, and how do you, what other things are we need to be looking at outside of just a fast database for it?
One of the most important things we should be looking for is a fast application development. Essentially, what happens with most enterprises is, which is quite different than internet companies, is they are not used to changing their applications very frequently, given the data platforms they have. In fact, enterprises have always had extremely fast and consistent databases from 20, 30 years ago, with IMS, DB2, and so on. However, that the speed of application development is really critical now. The speed with which you can apply new algorithms to generate new insights on existing data, as well as new data being created all the time, is critical for enterprise success, because that's what every customer now expects. In addition, they need to do all of this without slowing down or without the cost becoming too prohibitively expensive. So paying attention to the new storage technologies, the new architectures like hybrid memory are really important, because not only do they give you speed, they also give you flexibility of development as well as scale.
That's just to tag on to that question. I mean, we have a big trend now with a lot of the, especially internet-based companies going into this. You talked about fast applications. I mean, there's a lot of movement towards microservices. I know Forrester has a lot of research on it, and we talked about it too. So do you see that also adding to what you just said in terms of having the fast application development?
That's exactly right, because microservices allow applications to develop and store their data independently. It's not anymore stored. Excuse me. Data is not anymore stored in a central database.
Closer to the application.
Yeah, they're all stored closer to the applications. They have more independence and they can evolve faster, which means the existing data architectures, like having all of the data in a central database, which is what enterprises are built around, do not work either. You need equally robust systems on the edge or in multiple places in the enterprise. Again, one should look at new technologies for that.
Thanks, Srini. So Michelle, on the same question about FastDB, but a little bit twist to that. I mean, when you talk about your data fabric, I mean, Srini talked about fast databases, but what do you think, and how critical do you think real-time access to information? And obviously, your emphasis was a lot on the action. You talked about being prescriptive. You talked about how do you take some of these decisions at the right opportune moments? I mean, I think that's basically the word you're using. So when you talk about using and the driving decision at the right moment, how critical do you think is real-time access to information, and is, and can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a fundamental challenge in doing this that has to be raised too. So you certainly want to act upon insights as quickly as you get them, taking an action that does capture that opportunity. The challenge that you have with the data is the data moves at different speeds. some data is moving fast. If it's moving through a stream in an IoT platform, other data is moving slower because it's capturing within, sort of transactions, so it's a bit more periodic. And then there's other data that you're bringing in batch that is, data at rest about, weather and geology or, past behavior patterns, past transactions, or historical information that is out there. So ideally, what you have to do to support the analytics that are being developed and the algorithms that are being developed is understand the cadence of each one of your data sources and really think about how that rationalizes so that when you move it upstream, you're creating data sets that are still going to give you relevant insights to act upon, and they're not diminishing the value of that insight because they're out of sync with the other data. So there certainly is an amount of forethought and preparation to understand the cadence of the data as it comes in or as you're able to see it or as it's going to be refreshed. Impart that into the understanding of how that's prepared for the analytics as well as the analytics and the models are pushed upstream into those operational processes. And some of that is really even understanding if you're going to get this insight, how would you as an employee or a decision maker make that decision, and what is the trust around that information depending on how fresh or old that data is. So that is something you're going to have to think about as you're designing real-time insights. But not every insight has to be acted on immediately, too, and that goes back to those speed lanes. Sometimes if you hit certain performance levels or you're trying to do forecasting, that's good enough. But the real-time insights are where action should be taken immediately so that, you don't incur additional costs, you don't run into any regulatory risks, or, come out of compliance with your business. So there is a risk management lens to this that you place on it. There's an understanding of recognizing when you have the most opportune moment to affect and influence your business and your customers to get results. And then at the end, you're sort of aligning the way that your data is going to support that, both in terms of being captured as well as, migrated into an algorithm, or a model that's going to get that insight.
Thank you, Michelle. So I think, the next question is kind of closer to what you just talked about. That Srini, when Michelle talks about data at different speeds, and you touched on, kind of combining transactional and streaming workloads, and obviously we all kind of know that they actually have different levels of frequency. What are some of the real impediments? I mean, I know this is something which is kind of new. Customers are trying to do this today. Is there a cost issue? Is it a complexity issue? I mean, is it really the white space that is something new here? What are the innovations? I mean, can you kind of touch on that a little bit?
Sure. There are some real, I'll touch on about four of these areas. The first one is customer awareness of what can be done with new technology.
Right.
And the interesting thing is some of it, like hybrid memory architecture that I talked about, is new. And it is not believable when you first look at it.
Right.
But it has a certain potential, and many companies, have actually realized the potential. And it is at the beginning of that wave. So as people find more about it, I think this will happen.
So they're taking advantage of the hardware innovations along with the software innovations.
Right. So essentially making sure that this new architecture, which leverages things like NVMe drives, 3D cross-point from Intel, as well as DRAM, and provide this in-memory, hybrid memory architectures, which allows you to do queries in an order of magnitude faster than before, but also an order of magnitude with lower cost than before. And this is kind of win on both sides, which will enable to supercharge these systems of insight. And that is something which I think is an adoption curve there, which I think people will get into. The other important issue is interoperability of systems. How do you get the data that you're really interested in into this new system once you decide you're going to do this? And the data is typically not correct, it's not cleaned up, it's not accurate, and sometimes there are errors in it created because of tools which don't work with each other. So those are the kinds of things which I think there is a lot of work left to be done there. And the other one is migrating of these data. For example, I'll give you an actual example with a particular enterprise which is struggling with this, is they have their data in mainframes, and they have, believe it or not, EBCDIC to ASCII conversion issues, as well as assembler versus COBOL with a C program. And the interesting thing is, right, the existing enterprises are running fine with these applications. However, the future, they can't actually win the future with this anymore. We've reached the point where people have to migrate to these new insights-driven systems. And I think there's going to be some level of going against the grain.
Right.
Michelle
talked about the oil well example, right?
Yeah.
Oil wells have been there for a long time. It's the ability to take the information, make it more efficient, right? Drive some of these, take the cost out, make it production efficient is the most important part.
I think the last thing is organizational inertia. Now, the people who are able to take advantage of these, as always, are going to be the big winners.
Yeah.
And the people who don't, I think are going to lose big, because one thing that is very clear is in the internet side, all the big companies own their technology. That is very important. I think the same trend has started to run through financial services and other enterprises today, and that's the future. And taking advantage of technology means machine learning, means generating insights, all of the things that help your top line.
Yeah. Thank you, Srini. So we are almost out of time, but we have one last question. I thought it's very important, Michelle, we talk about this. I mean, we talked about what's good, all the things which is working, but there has to be some challenges. I mean, and your unique perspective of talking to customers from a research firm standpoint. So what do you think quickly, a couple of the key challenges then for customers to get started with this?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. So first is the data architecture and management teams really starting to shift their mindsets around goals for them that are not just about reducing total cost of ownership and managing the data infrastructure, but really orienting their data strategies and where they make their investments and where they optimize towards the initiatives the business is trying to achieve. Looking for those areas where there are digital mindsets in place, looking at those areas where the development teams are building out more robust modern capabilities to energize business processes and customer engagement. Don't wait for them to come to you with data requirements or data needs, or don't let them go around you for that, because they won't even get the data requirements right or the insight requirements right that are really going to get the value out of those upstream investments, those top line investments. So first is really shifting the mindset with just don't build a field of dreams and assuming that it's going to help your business. Really understand where the priorities, where the initiatives, and where the core business outcomes are being expected. Number two, and again, it's sort of building on that theme, is understand, and Srini kind of started to point this out, understand where the data teams and the developer teams need to come together much better. You're never going to build a microservice that isn't in some way grounded on top of data, grounded on top of a data service, grounded on top of an analytic capability that's embedded. Those are all places that we're seeing more and more companies introducing their own data engineers to take the strategies that architects come up with to support these systems of insight and start putting those into the solutions that businesses are using. Bringing data expertise that application developers don't normally have. Reducing the friction, improving the data governance compliance, ensuring the adoption of modern data management platform investments is really where the data engineer can play a strong role and help in what Srini was talking about, of going from sort of that latency data management mindset and activity and driving it into data services at the speed of business so you get insights to action quickly. So those are really the two areas that I see some of the most struggle, orienting towards business outcomes and what your stakeholders are really looking for, not just trying to offset the cost of managing data. And secondly, organizing your architecture and your engineering capabilities to be in sync with all of the upstream solution capabilities that are being deployed, and leverage your expertise in productive ways so that you can maximize what systems of insights will deliver to the business.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. So with that, we will conclude this webinar. Again, special thanks to our panelists, Michelle Guest and Srini Srinivasan from Aerospike. And thanks for all of you for joining, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.